Now, excellent storytelling usually requires, or often indeed requires, difficult access to individuals or organisations. Obviously, we're going to look today at how best to obtain that difficult access. It's the Holy Grail. It's those individuals and organisations whose secrets we want to unearth and whose stories we want to hear. But often those same groups are notoriously private and secretive. So therefore, how do you obtain that access? And indeed, once you've got it, what do you do with it? How can you make the most of it and make it work into a great film? We are joined today by three very established proponents of the big access-driven series and documentaries. To my immediate right is Siobhan Mulholland, who is a Sky Factual Commissioner. We also have Emma Reed, who's the MD of Emporium Productions, and the highly esteemed filmmaker Michael Waldman. Would you mind offering a round of applause for my lovely colleagues? So they're here to share their knowledge, experience, and top tips. That's hopefully going to be the purpose of this morning, and hopefully it will be helpful to yourselves. Plus, we have an incredibly exciting announcement about a brand new series coming to Sky One, which really is the most sort of high watermark example of access, difficult access to a very private organisation indeed, an institution whose doors have hitherto been firmly closed, but have been open to the cameras of Sky One. So we'll be looking at that shortly. But first, let's take a look at the very exciting work that's currently being commissioned by Sky's factual team. Take a look at this. Great stuff. Well, as we all know, access comes in different shapes and sizes. Talent, institutions, organisations, government departments. So just to kick us off, Siobhan, what do you think are the kind of key skills that you need to open the doors to that difficult access? What do you think? Do you just have to be nice?
That helps. I think it's actually tenacity. I think the longer I do this, the more I think tenacity. You just have to be patient. Number one, you wait and wait. And the series we're going to announce in a minute took 2 years of waiting. I think you have to be actually quite politically astute. You have to go into that room and you have to gauge what type of people you're dealing with. And I think at the end of the line, it's actually honesty. You know, you say what you're going to do and you do that, and you don't deviate from that. And if you've done it as, you know, Michael and Emma have done it over the years, they have a track record, they have a calling card, people know they're not going to lie because you want, you know, you have a future, you want to go back. So I think trust, actually, and you only really get trust when you get into a room with people and you talk and you spend time with those people.
So it's not this idea that if you want to get access to somebody who is notoriously private or has something to hide, it's not that you have to have a sort of cloak and dagger approach where you've got to somehow stitch them up and be very journalistic.
Well, that won't work, because at the end of the day, they will check your footage before it goes out for factual accuracy. I mean, you do a hospital, you do a police service, you do anybody, they're entitled to view it. And they can watch it there. And then, you know, you'll get adverse press afterwards. They'll say, we agreed to this, they did this. And you'll get a bad name, and they won't come back to you. I mean, we've done so many series at Sky, and I can be completely honest, we had a slightly tense one with an MOD access one, and they will have us back, but that's on our record.
Yeah. You've got it in your copybook.
Yeah, so there's no point. And also, why do we want to do that? You know, Sky is not a public broadcasting corporation. Obs docs are all about observing people, they're not investigating them. We don't want to stitch up, we don't want to be, you know, go behind the scenes and expose. We want people to tell their stories for who they are, and often the ordinary lives are the most extraordinary. It's fascinating in itself. Harrow is a fantastic insight into a very exclusive institution. There was no, I mean, Emma made that.
Well, getting access to any school is unprecedented. Just to have cameras in a school, just because of the nature of it being filled with children, is already a great achievement. And for it to be an esteemed 400-year-old institution like Harrow is a double whammy.
Well, completely. And I think it's interesting if you look at the way docs are going now that we're moving away from using so much voiceover. So we are letting the people and the pictures tell the story.
Yeah.
And therefore you're not manipulating
I do
it.
a lot of voiceover work and I have felt it. I have, but that's fine. And so Emma, how about you? Now, I just wonder whether a key aspect of this is that there isn't a template. Because if you're booking a studio entertainment show, then you've got your standard email which goes to all the agents and you just change the name of the talent in each email and it is a template. Whereas I get the feeling this is all not quite on the hoof, but you've somehow got to improvise.
I think that every single place has different, you have to bend to what they want. After all, they're letting you in, you're the one who has the privilege, not them. You have to work out what's in it for them, so you have to sell it back to them in a way, and you have to make promises that you know you can definitely keep. And more than that, you have to be really frank and open right at the beginning as to how they're going to come across and how you're going to do that. But to say, in the end, it's all in your hands because we will shine that light into, your institution, your home, your life, and then it's kind of up to you because you'll be telling the story.
Does it start with rapport? Like if you identify who your first point of contact is, even if it's not, the core element of the institution, but a gatekeeper, do you need to just somehow charm that individual? How do you approach it? And sort of because the problem is that really the kind of TV we want to watch, the documentaries we want to watch, are the ones that are hardest to make. They're the most compelling. So by definition, you're working from the point of view of the answer is no before you started. You've got to work backwards.
Well, you have to really like people. You have to really get on with them. And if you're going to be making something for 6 months or a year, you've got to think to yourself, we've got to find a point of connection here, because if you don't, they're not going to want you to come in, are they? I mean, you wouldn't let someone into your home that you thought looked like a shifty kind of dishcloth salesman on the doorstep.
Those people I love, I've got to say.
But
generally I know what you mean. Well, no, it's an interesting point. Michael, you've made many such films. What particular skills do you adopt and use? What do you have at your disposal that separates you from the rest, do you think?
I don't know if there's anything that separates me from the rest, but what I try and do is, I concur with what Emma and Siobhan have just said, but additionally, I suppose you adapt yourself, which isn't to say you're dishonest, because that is, people see through that, but you definitely, behaviour, what you wear, just everything about how one approaches a place. You think about what it is that they are comfortable with, and then you try and provide it. And to some extent, in our job, it is a bit of being a chameleon. That's not an original observation, but it is true. I remember, the first film I ever made, which I was before all of you were born, was it wasn't in one sense access to an institution of the sort we're talking about here, but it was bizarrely its title was The Apprentice, nothing to do with what then came. It was about a one-off on BBC Two about a trainee funeral director. And my little thought, I'd been asked if I was given the opportunity at BBC many years ago to make a film. And this I thought was a good idea, because it's such a rare thing. It was a way into that world. And to cut a long story short, I remember the going to visit the 16-year-old who I knew was about to start in a funeral home, and in the north of England, and he'd never been to Newcastle, let alone to London. And I remember speaking to his mum on the phone, and the discussion was, did I want to come to lunch? And I remember saying, no, let me come to sort of tea at 4 o'clock, because I didn't want them thinking that this man from the BBC with a posh accent needed posh food, whatever. And I had been earlier that day at the funeral home and was wearing a suit, which was unusual for me, being a hippie, trendy TV person from North London. But I was wearing my dark suit, and I remember as I walked to their house, I remember taking my tie off, or was making it askew, and getting up a bit of a breath and arriving. And when they were a bit nervous because I was a big deal, and I didn't think I was, but I was the man from the BBC. And I remember immediately saying, God, I just need a cup of tea, I've had a terrible day. And she then mothered me, and the ice was broken and everything was fine. And had I got in saying, hello, very pleased to meet you, and let's have tea and scones, and they provided the doilies or whatever. I made myself vulnerable to make them feel.
It's emotional intelligence.
Well, I suppose that's what. So when you're dealing with directors of communication of large organisations, or their chairman or managing director,
you ask them for tea.
Well, it's not quite the same, but you adapt to their what will make them feel comfortable.
I think it's a really important point. I think perhaps TV at its worst can be them and us, as in it's the producers and the on-screen talent versus the contributor. And it's like the idea that the person you're making a film about is a civilian, whereas actually, if you can just approach it in a human way, especially with this difficult access, that's going to be the way to go, rather than, we're from Sky, we're from BBC, and we kind of know what you're doing, so just please behave yourself.
You won't get anywhere if you do.
No, I mean, am I saying what we're doing? Am I going to announce
Well,
it?
should we do it now?
Yeah.
I think this is amazingly exciting, because when I first heard about this, I mean, it's been the holy grail in factual television for as long as I can remember, which is a documentary about an incredibly ancient and very private institution. And it's a very good example of where the answer is no before you've started, but you've pulled one out of the hat, so tell us more.
It's the Freemasons. And that's the one that took myself and Emma, Natalie, 2 years to get across the line. And I think it's sort of, if I tell you the story of it, it's the classic story of access. Somebody brought me the idea, I went to meet the Freemasons, I put on a nice dress, I went to meet the Freemasons, and we talked about it. They liked Sky's approach to documentary making, which is what I said earlier, very straightforward, no agenda here. Also, Sky has all these hundreds of thousands of customers. Many of our customers are Freemasons, as they are when we did sort of Greg's and when we've done places like that you don't go out to offend people. So, we're very clear cut in our approach and what we're trying to do. And so they liked Sky, but I wasn't across the line. And they didn't say no to us, but they weren't happy with us. Well, they weren't happy totally with what this way we were suggesting of making it. And then I introduced them to Emma. And completely loved Emma, and my lasting sort of huge memory was going to Uggle, the Grand Council in Holborn, and going into this huge room, and there were all these men who were predominantly in their 70s, very grey, and you'll see from the clips we'll show you, it doesn't change much in the actual filming. And Emma and I sat there, and I'd done my spiel twice over to them about Sky, and that I had absolutely nothing to hide, but getting it over the line, I have to give credit to Emma. I think it was the producer who actually does it, because that's the person who's going to, so to speak, live with them. And the one line Emma said that really, I mean, I just sold my life to you at the end of that session. But the one line that Emma said, she said, I'm always friends with the people I film. 20 years on, I'm still in contact with them. And I think that says it all. If you can say that to your contributors, and you can say that to people you're going to get access to, and they can phone up the people you've filmed or you've made documentaries about. That's your best calling card. But, as Michael said, to Uggle, gosh, I dressed as if I was going to a Tory garden party. And you do adapt to where you're going.
Yes.
I mean, weirdly, when I go and see the MOD, I also, and nobody goes...
Full military fatigue.
Yeah, completely. So it's almost like being sympathetic to whatever organisation you're going to, but at the same time, you're not being duplicitous because you can't lie. I mean, that's the thing, you're so exposed on TV, you can't lie.
No, brilliant. Well, we should have a look at this. I believe we've got 2 clips, and therefore let's take a look at the first one, Inside This World, that really hasn't appeared on film in this manner before, so let's take a look. We'll perhaps have a look at the next clip shortly. What's obviously a dilemma is once you get the yes, it's yes asterisk, isn't it? It's like, yes, you've got access, you can
See-
make the film, but really that conversation has only begun in terms of how much you can do once you're
Completely.
in.
And then as a commissioner, you have to trust your producer.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like Neil Grant in Greg's, it goes absolutely brilliantly, and we had a very funny series. Others, which I'm not going to mention, it gets tricky. And that shows on screen, because, and also shows in the edit suite, because you go on and edit and re-edit, and you don't have the footage, and you don't have the access, and you don't have those great, insightful interviews. And so therefore, as a commissioner, you sort of hand over, because you can't be there every day. And, you know, Emma has done a fantastic job with the Masons at this most, I think I can use it's paranoid and worried and insecure. And in a way, if you look at the history of the way they're being portrayed by the press, you can understand it, because they're always made out to be secretive and slightly nutty and that. So I'd be frightened to let cameras in, and they've totally let you in and trusted you and given you access to things they said they wouldn't give you access to.
That's about growing access, isn't it?
Yeah.
We talk about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point.
Because, you know, when you get you get through the door and they go, yeah, come in. And really you're still on trial with them, because obviously they're the ones giving you access, and they can shut down at any time. Anybody can shut down at any time. You know, they can still let you film, but what are you filming? And the longer that you film with people, the better you're getting to know them, the more they're realising, because you can't keep fakery up forever.
Yeah.
And the more they realise that you are being honest. And I learned something on Harrow, where we lived with, we always have a room and an office whenever we're in an institution. We always say we need to be in the middle. You know, so we always work from that place. And in Harrow, we had a room in the actual boarding house. And you know, they were quite.
It's good to be embedded, I'm assuming, somehow.
Very,
You
yes.
want to be on site.
Exactly. And then you're there all the time. And you know, you have to have very dedicated and wonderful producers and assistant producers to do this with. And you know, I'm fortunate that the teams that I work with are fab at this and gaining people's trust, because it's not just about me, it's not just about me or Siobhan or us going, oh yes, we'll keep our promises. You know, the day-to-day producers and directors who are making this are key to it all, of course. But what we learnt there was we didn't show them anything until April, May, and we were so nervous about showing them something, because you know, we were making a lot of television, and we knew that if they didn't like it, they could immediately, because we're filming with minors, they could immediately say, no, you can't film with that boy, no, you can't film with that boy, no, you can't film with that boy, and they could effectively shut us down completely. And when we very nervously showed them the first programme, and they loved it so much that suddenly we were filming all sorts of other things that we didn't even know about. Because that's the other thing, is that, you know, like one's own life, there's an awful lot you don't tell anybody.
There's probably that tipping point where
Yes.
the trust is earned, and it's
Yes.
like that old Uncle Monty line in With No Lights. Was it free to those that can afford it, very expensive to those that can't?
Yes.
It's like once you're in, you're in, but it can't happen quickly. I mean, what I'm
Doesn't
curious
happen
about,
quickly.
Michael, is how do you make your film and not their film? Because that's, in a
yes,
way,
no,
that's the
it's
tension,
fundamental.
isn't it? Would you say?
Absolutely, yeah, completely. And they often think that, or assume, or hope that you're going to make a corporate PR video. And it's getting worse, I think. I think directors of communication sort of have that feeling. And sometimes they blame things that were done 20 years ago. In my case, the series The House, about a year in the life of the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden, which made a lot of noise and, you know, won lead prizes and headlines, but made people a bit nervous thereafter. That's ancient history now. But in terms of making one's, you just in a way have to both be honest, but also it's not duplicity, but it's I hear what you say, Siobhan, about Sky not having an agenda, and that's fine and proper, and that applies to many observational documentaries on other channels. But you have to have some sort of, in my view, some sort of journalistic agenda which isn't necessarily negative, at least is telling a story which resonates in the wider world and so on. And in order to do that, I think you have to both be honest and transparent, but at the same time actually have an eye open for things that they either don't want or don't realise that they're doing, or that you've captured. So it's interesting what you say about showing them while filming. I've never done that, and I can see in different circumstances it would be more or less appropriate, and indeed in your experience it obviously was a positive, helpful and useful thing. I think the danger, it's one thing to show clips, it's another thing to show a whole programme, and I think the danger is you have to be, the viewing, when they see it for factor accuracy at whatever point, is always a fascinating and slightly terrifying event, because even if you're contractually pretty solid, there is the human relationships that you have, and if people who are watching it are themselves in the films, because of their role in the organisation, they're both being the big cheese or the communications boss, and that's why they're coming to see the film before it's finally locked for factor accuracy and some confidentiality issues, whatever the agreement is, but the editorial control is still with the broadcaster, of course. Then, in answer to your question, how do you make sure it's your film? Well, in the end, I think my responsibility is to the broadcaster slightly more than to the organisation. Hopefully both are happy.
Yes.
And that's not a rule.
Of course.
I'm curious if we have another clip. Gareth, do we have another clip fired up? Brilliant. Let's have another little look at this amazing world, and we'll follow up a couple of quick questions about the Freemasons documentary, and then we'll move on to our next conversation. Here it is. Emma, tell me about any problems you may have had. It can't have been the smoothest journey working inside this organisation.
Well, I think that it's not so much that we've had problems, but that it's all about what we were talking about earlier, about building the access. So, here's an organisation that's 300 years old, and it's the main one in the world, really, and it's got so many rules and regulations, and what they decided 300 years ago is what they still do today. And to men like Dave Stubbs there, who was just being installed as the worshipful master of the old Ben Lodge in Lancashire, he has PTSD, served in the, this is all about personal stories of blokes who are just really ordinary blokes, actually, who are finding some kind of sense of belonging in the 21st century. But Freemasonry to them is very, very central to their lives, and they're very protective of it. And there are lots of rules and regulations governed by London. So wherever you go, you can't just say, oh, can we do this, can we do that? They need to check, continuously checking what can we show, what can't we show. Because every time, there's a lodge meeting, that's private, and right from the beginning it was, we cannot film any of that. Oh my God, how are we going to make a film when we can't see the main stuff? And there are bits that we will never be able to film, even though I know what goes on there, but we can't film because they're seen as very private occasions for those individual men. So the challenge for us all the way along has been to push and push and push to try and get a bit more out of them. And we've filmed stuff that's never been seen by quite a lot of Masons, let alone by non-Masons. And they've been great like that, but we've had to work very closely together with them, because we can't just storm in somewhere and sneakily do something, because they'll soon find out, and secondly, you can't make a pledge to somebody at the beginning that you'll abide by your parameters if you then go and undermine them, because
I wonder whether an aspect of access is that what you have to do is co-opt your contributors into being part of the team. So tying in with this theme of them and us, and trying to avoid that someone's the director, someone's the producer, someone is the contributor. In fact, for the purposes of the film, you're working together. It's a collaborative thing, and therefore you perhaps have to almost train them up into the process of, because I've noticed that, having made documentaries, that after a few days they've sort of got the hang of it themselves.
Yeah, they do realise what the tricks are.
And they're even they're clipping the microphone on themselves.
So they were suggesting things to you.
They have got to the stage where they're suggesting things, and I think the thing is that I just rewind slightly to the very beginning, and then I repeat this all the way through, because just the style of what I do, and I think lots of observational documentaries, is that hopefully they're not plastered in commentary, and it's not the voice that is found in an edit. Obviously you find a form and you find a way of telling their story which is observational, but of course you've crafted it and shaped it to tell it in a particular way. But I do say to them, you know, you come back and we'll be interviewing you, so you're telling your story. You're the one whose angle it is. We're not going to plaster all over it. We haven't got a reporter. We haven't got anybody interpreting what's going on here. So you have to be really open and honest, because the viewers are not mad. Because you have to remember the viewer in all this. And who are you making the programme for? I'm not making it for my contributors. I'm actually making it for an audience. And if the viewer sees something and they have so many questions at the end of it, they don't really know what was going on, or they smell a rat, or they think, well, this is just a puff piece, you know, they will turn off and they won't enjoy it. And so I always am really frank and open with my contributors that it's all down to them and their openness and honesty, because if they're not, people will instantly see that. And gradually they get it, they realise it. And as you know, I do show people bits of rushes now, not a lot, but just so that they know what we're doing. Just occasionally I show them stuff, and they, you know, I say, look, we can't use this because look at it. Or look at the person. I wouldn't.
You include, if was that difficult access, you include them in the process a little bit.
I do, but and I think that, for instance, the series producer, exec producer Gabe Solomon, who's making Freemasons with me and also made Harrow with me, we both started many years ago. We were the first team that made video diaries many centuries ago, and so where we actually gave from BBC then, it was unique, we gave editorial control to the contributors, the diarists, and so I have to say, I'm so not scared of collaborating with people, because the minute you've got an open and honest dialogue, you can say to them, I'm not putting that in, or I'm not going to have you saying that, you sound ridiculous. And equally, they might say, I really want to get this across, and I'm going to say, well, I'll give my honest opinion.
I mean, Siobhan, as the commissioning editor, there is a conflict, though, isn't there? Because you might have access to a world which is unpalatable or dark, and we need to see that because that's the truth. But the people involved will be horrified at just how bad they're coming across, probably just because they're terrible people, and therefore, you have your own ambitions for the film, which is for the truth to come out. You're not editorialising at Sky, but you still, if someone's a monster, they're a monster. So I suppose you must feel slightly conflicted that on the one hand you want to have that access, but on the other hand, there are occasions when what you're actually going to broadcast is going to be unpalatable for them.
I mean, I think undoubtedly. I mean, I think what goes on is a healthy tension between the commissioner and the exec often, because you'll get to the edit suite and you'll say, but what about this? What about that? What about that? And I'm not saying with Emma, but I know with other programmes I work with, you sometimes feel the exec has got a bit too close to who they're filming, and you don't feel the PR in the room, but you can just see what's going on. The access has been tricky, and possibly people have become more compliant. So it's quite easy for me to walk in.
So it can work the other way. The contributor can actually seduce the producer.
Completely. And you know, I've been a producer. I know what it's like. You know, it's really fine line to keep people on board for 6 months, a year. So you often play the difficult character by going in and saying, "Can we have this? Can we have this?" And then they will, you know, many people have said, "Oh, Sky want this, Sky want that," and they'll use Sky not as the baddie, but as and that's fine.
Yeah.
No, I don't mind them doing that.
So it's important that the producer who's in the field doesn't have to do all of the dirty work.
Exactly.
That there's some support.
There is leverage from behind to say, actually, you said you were going to do this. This is what we're after. And in terms of showing unpleasant stuff, Ross Kemp, our series Extreme World, he exposes some really, you know, fairly brutal stuff around the world. From his brilliant doc on looking at rape in South Africa, to, I mean, he's just done for the next series an absolutely fascinating film on Mongolia, and coming out 11th July we've got his journey through Syria and Iraq, and there's some, you go in and you watch it, and because the team are in a way more inured to those images than you sit there and go, oh, can't show that, and then actually, you know, they quite rightly fight back at me and say no, and On the whole, I'd say 85% of the time I say, okay, that is important for people to see. It's just because I'm upset at that moment. I can't stop other people seeing very important footage.
Now, full stop on the Masons, the Freemasons. Did you come away liking those people in that organisation more than you expected, and with a better understanding of why such an arcane institution exists in the 21st century?
Still filming with them. Haven't finished
The
yet.
jury's out.
No, I think that it's like any organisation. I really like a lot of the people that I've met there, and I understand why they want, I'm fundamentally interested in why they want to join. This is not a programme about the Freemasons, it's not a step back documentary where we go and this means this and this is what they do here and this is how this happens. It's a story, and that second clip was a much better, was a good example of what the programme's about. It's about individual men and why they want to belong to something that, they wear aprons that are decorated, and one bloke that memorably said, oh, I've been wanting to do this since I was 14 years old. I've just got such apron envy.
Oh, wow. #apron envy.
Yeah, so I think that I do really like them. I think that, like any organisation, you find people who, that's the brilliant thing about what we do. We go into all sorts of other people's lives and their worlds, and we say, God, I can visit and I can dip into this and get a whole different understanding of life for 6-10 months or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly privileged, so I am really enjoying it because it's giving me a different perspective as well.
Well, I think what's really interesting is the general theme, which would maybe surprise the audience, is that you don't necessarily have an agenda and you're not there to really stitch people up. It's just a case of letting those stories emerge and letting the characters be themselves.
Harrow and the Freemasons, it's quite extraordinary worlds. So you
don't need to.
You have to work at constructing a story, but you don't have to use an old-fashioned term, set them up or anything like that, because they are remarkable in themselves. And we've gone into other worlds where we thought they were remarkable, and the people have turned out to be fairly mundane. And actually, it's a very dull documentary. So we're not doing anything. These people are extraordinary in themselves. Or what they do, their rituals and their social life and what they're seeking is extraordinary.
Our job is to coax the extraordinary out of them.
Yeah. Because it's in there.
And not assume we know what it is. I think it's in all sorts of places. The extraordinary is in there, but you just have to have a bit of patience. And back to your point earlier, I don't think that any odd dot where you spend time and energy on, you're not passing the buck, you're not giving them editorial control, they don't end up making their own programme at all. That is not what happens. But it is an honest partnership. They know that they are there, warts and all. And it's building that confidence for them to finally let go for you, which is the secret. We don't hand over editorial control to people. We don't cede, that to our contributors, and they know that.
And their membership's declining. So they said we could come in.
Interesting. You sort of see there's a moment in their history when they're perhaps more
Nobody's going to let you in unless they really want to, and perhaps might need a bit of exposure.
Yeah.
What's in it for them?
Right. Yeah. Well, obviously the Freemasons series is going to be unmissable. The Harrow series was extraordinary, and also just visually amazing, actually, amazingly shot. So let's take a look at Harrow, a very British school, also made by Emma. So that's this is an unusual access issue whereby, because of the law, you can't have full editorial control because minors are involved. So it's slightly different from the usual negotiation I went for. Because, Siobhan, if I said to you, I can get Donald Trump, I've got a week with Donald, it's Donald and, Donald and me, but Donald has full editorial control, he can decide everything. You're going to have to walk away from that one, aren't you?
Under the law, under the broadcasting law, Ofcom, I've got to walk away.
Yeah.
The broadcaster has final editorial control, so we can't commission that. And actually, I can say it in this room, I'm so pleased about that law, because so often you will walk in and you'll say, sorry, that is it. And one really tricky negotiation contract. I mean, the individuals were throwing everything at the Sky lawyers of the access agreement. It was making us, almost laugh by the end, injunctions and the whole lot. And at the end of the day, we just went back and said, you can't, it's illegal to do that.
It's a good word.
Yeah.
Yeah, it tends to finish most arguments. However...
Do you want to spend a week with Donald?
Well, I do have Donald, yes, we're Facebook friends, and so just leave it with me, give me 6 months. So how about that unusual scenario where you have the duty of care to these children, and also just on a human moral level, you wouldn't want a child to be in any way embarrassed or harmed because of what's been broadcast?
Quite right. It's not for me to go trashing somebody's life.
But it has the risk of killing the film altogether if you're not careful, doesn't it?
Well, if you watched this film, the series, you'll know that it didn't. And I think that the secret there is time. And I think that the longer you spend with people, the easier it gets. And you can easily draw characters out. And, it's not that you can't show kids, doing what kids do and being themselves, but you'd have to think very carefully about showing them doing anything illegal. You couldn't do that, and nor would I want to. But we weren't making a film just about the kids. We were making a film about the school, the headmaster, the housemaster, the other staff, the way it's run, and the impact of that place on the boys. And of course the boys on the place. And
do you find that the first few weeks of footage are almost unusable because everyone's just on their best behaviour? Do you have to write off that first sort of period when everyone is, very guardedly trying to look good on camera and being formal?
First show of Harrow was the hardest to make, that's for sure. And it's also because you're going with that one. We turned that around super speedy. I think we got access in July, and we were filming at the beginning of September, Sky having leapt into action to commission it, which was fantastic. And we started, and we didn't know our way around, we had no idea where people worked, and so we were all over the place, and you don't focus, and so we skip over that pretty quickly.
But going back to those children things, a lot of the requests that come in are fairly easy to do. I remember with Gordonston, which was in After Harry, it was a boy in the opening titles, and he sits on a bench on the sea or a tree trunk, and it breaks, and he's quite a large boy. And they said, if you're going to show that in titles over and over again, it's going to have and that's perfectly reasonable. It was going to have a very negative impact on that boy to see himself portrayed as overweight.
Yeah.
And then another thing we did body cameras on people, and we rigged a minicab, and they showed the family the footage beforehand, and the father said, it's an awful shot of my daughter in there, she's 19 in the front seat and she looks really fat, she's really upset. Now she's not a minor, and so we don't have to change that for any editor. And I chatted it with a few of the complainants, and I said, well, why upset them? It's not going to help the story to keep that picture of her.
So maybe it's a case of choose your fights.
Yeah, that doesn't change the editorial. And so why?
And if you give some ground, then it's better for the relationship.
Yeah.
And how did you get? Because the numbers at Harrow are not dwindling thanks to Russian oligarchs. It's a very, very oversubscribed school. So therefore, what was in it for them? Why on earth did they say yes?
Because we went to them. When did we go to? We went to them, and it was a new headmaster. And the school was going through enormous changes, and they had a period, I think, where the school had drifted slightly, and they certainly wanted to, something in it for everybody. I can't completely answer for them, but I suggest that numbers from British applicants certainly went up after the series, for instance. So, you think, it's just a selling puff for them. But actually, it made them all think quite carefully about what was going on. And the more we made it, the more I realised that the headmaster actually was in a battle royal, to change the school rather. And, boarding in that way is dropping in this country. What's it like to board? I have particular views, although you may not know them from that film, about boarding. And I think it's really important to look at how being in an institution like that affects boys. And I was very open about what I thought and about their education, and let's share that. And it was at a particular time when Michael Gove was then the Education Secretary, and it was all about, you know, what's going on in state schools and what are pupils in state schools getting educationally. What does somebody who's paying £33,000 a year get educationally? And there is quite a large difference, I can say. My children go to state schools, and I thought that it was really worth looking at this world that is, you know, let's face it, people, you know, you say that, you know, lots of it's oversubscribed, but actually, you know, a fraction of 7% of people in this country go to private schools, and, you know, of that, of the very top private schools, a tiny number. So it's worth looking at. And the head teacher, who was state educated himself, actually, you know, I think that he thought that it was worth opening the place up to say, look at what we're trying to do.
So it's going back to people, the intrinsic interest of an institution. Gordonston, I don't think was as strong as Harrow, because, to use your words, it's a posh comprehensive. So in the evening you'd see the teenagers hanging out in their dorms, and they all seem very normal and natural and at ease with themselves, whereas Harrow, they wear rather I'm choosing my words, very traditional uniform.
You've still got the boaters, haven't you? Straw boaters.
So it's just purely viewing, you know.
It's a visual medium.
Yeah, and they live an extraordinary existence.
And very regimented and traditional.
But you have to have something to say. You can't just go, access documentary isn't just going and making a film about. You've got to find what's the core of it. What is it that you're trying to convey? What's the storyline? You know, it can't just be today they're going to play sports. You know,
yeah. And how do you identify that story? Does that do you storyboard that in advance, or does that emerge when you're
both.
Filming it?
Both. You know why you're interested in a place. The more you find out about it, you know, in the process of getting. I didn't really know anything about Freemasons to begin with.
You're an expert now.
But now,
yeah. I mean, Michael, is the challenge, I suppose, to identify when this difficult access might be amenable to having a film made about them, and it's just at a moment in their history when perhaps they do, there's something in it for them. Does there have to be something, even if it's a tiny kernel of an opportunity?
Yes, I mean, why should any institution open itself up to what is now in a sophisticated media knowledge world a risk, unless there's some motivation? Yeah. I imagine the motivation of Harrow, as you described, New Broom, wanting, you know, proudly doing changes that he thinks are necessary, but also dispelling myths. And in many of these institutions, in fact, both of the two you've been talking about and look fascinating in terms of the ones to come, there are myths, and you can genuinely say we're going to dispel those myths. That's some negative myths. And if you let us in and show us as you really are, and there is no huge agenda to do a hatchet job, absolutely, and that has to be the case, then, you know, a little bit of you think sometimes they might hang themselves without realising it, but that will usually be an individual and slightly embarrassing moment rather than an institutional issue. And that's the thing that is both easy and difficult. Easy in the sense that you need to identify something that you can tell them is the motivation for doing it, beyond ego and vanity on the part of the boss, and that's always helpful if there is some, but it's never enough usually to get to, for him to be able to persuade the institution, his colleagues, to let you in. So there has to be a feeling that there's some reason that they're going to gain out of it. But then you have to also draw back and say that it is not a corporate PR video, it's not a puff piece, and it can't be. And if it is, the audience will smell it, and the broadcaster will either not transmit it or transmit it at 2 in the morning. And I use these threats. The commissioning editor will be distressed at how completely appalling this is so far. Let's together make
you have
it
to get them to collude with you.
Yes. Well, you use anything any weapon you can
collude
find
with them into making a film that they don't really want to make. But
well, no, but that's where, in a way, they think they don't want to make it, but you have to persuade them that they do.
Help them understand.
And that's the most difficult bit of persuasion, which is that I find myself doing it genuinely in the past, in many cases, and in the present, which is to say, if we do what you want, it will be dull, and it will be clearly smell to a sophisticated audience. Yeah. Will before that, the commissioning editor, the broadcaster, whatever, that it's just a puff piece. And therefore, all the good stuff that we're seeing will not be credible, because it will feel like a puff piece. Therefore, you've got to show us the warts so that it's a warts-all programme. While the wart isn't as desperately catastrophic and fatal to your reputation as you think, it's human and it's indeed quite endearing, whatever it is. And on top of that, to the extent it's marginally embarrassing to you as an individual, you as an institution, actually the audience will see that and therefore probably feel more towards you because they like you as a human being or you as an institution which is slightly flawed. And what's more, all the 98%, which is wonderful, they'll now believe. So let us see that little moment.
And a lot of it might just be stylistic, mightn't it? But something I've always tried to avoid is the word interview. I mean, that's just kryptonite to a documentary, isn't it? The word interview. Because there's a perception on the part of the contributor that we'll sit down, like on the Andrew Marr show, and they'll be in one seat and you'll be on the other, and then you'll have this list of questions, and no one wants to see that, and you get stock answers. And you just say to the contributor, well, look, if you're, who knows what they could be doing, but if you're going to be driving to work or if you're in a field milking a cow, whatever can we just have that conversation while you're doing that? And you have to somehow just get them sort of on board with the idea that we'd really like to just see them in action, how they live, and it's going to be better all round. Rather than, there's a conception.
Well, you're right, but I wouldn't have put a veto on sitting someone down in a well-lit room.
Show Michael's interview with the two princes.
Well, yeah, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
We've got quite a back catalogue of, it's amazing access. The first one we've got is a clip from Our Queen, which is extraordinary. So let's take a look at that, and then we'll have a look at Prince Charles and the Princess and Anton Deck. First up, here's Our Queen. Maybe now would be a good time to discuss Brexit. What do you think? Shall we just have a little intermission?
That was in Jubilee year 2012. So that
was it, pre-Brexit. Now, tell us, how did you begin that conversation with Clarence House?
Buckingham Palace in this case.
Oh, was it? Oh, yeah.
Clarence House is the next one.
Of course.
It's complicated. It's quadruply complicated in that you've made a fundamental error. You're not going to be making.
You're going to get
No, they'd be very understanding of that.
I think if you
called it the Kremlin, they might worry. Look, the world of the Queen is extremely complicated. Fundamentally, what you can't do in that world is appeal to the decision maker. Because for that sort of filming, she is the decision maker, and however elevated I might have got, I never found myself rolling up my sleeves and saying, well, ma'am, it's going well, but can we please have X and Y and Z? What actually happens though is taking it away from this, but using it as an example, in any institution, if we're talking about access to institutions, you sort of have to work out where the power lies and who is the ultimate decision maker or decision makers, and use them very sparingly, but as a supportive appeal when things aren't going well. So, in the case of the Buckingham Palace, there's the press secretary to the Queen, who is like the director of communications in any other organisation. Then there's the private secretary to the Queen, Sir Tumpty Dumpty, or whatever his name is, and he is the managing director. And then she's obviously, God knows what you call her, not president, because that's inappropriate in a democratic monarchy. But so I did find myself saying at times to the press secretary, and of course when we're filming, we're being supervised by minions, minders who are under her, and that's always another problem. If you're being supervised by someone without authority, they're usually the worst, because they say, no, you can't do that, you can't do that. And you have to say, surely, my cameraman can take 1 meter forward, or we can film someone going in a meeting, or whatever it is. And if they have no power, they tend not to give you any leeway. And you want actually someone, if you're in a minded situation, you actually want the senior most minded you can get, who can make a decision to allow you in these circumstances because you're being nice or whatever it is. So in the case of this place, press secretary to the Queen, endless discussions, things going well, things not going well, going to her and saying it's not working. Eventually, twice I went to Sir Christopher Gite, is the name of the private secretary to the Queen, a very charming gentleman. I didn't mean to demean him by calling him a silly title. And I would say, it's all going fantastically, the press secretary and her team are doing wonderfully by us, but a slight little thing without which this isn't going to work. Can you see what you can do? and he would, in a sort of wonderfully patrician and aristocratic and diplomatic and non-committal way, say, you know, in effect, I hear you, we'll see. And it might or might not happen. And then sometimes, it was rather bizarre, because where I wanted something specific, and they were in a sort of giving mood, one felt, as a result of these sort of conversations, I'd then say, well, can we possibly do X? And I remember on 2 occasions the press secretary said, well, I'll ask. And what that meant was she would put a note into the Queen's red box, and that evening the Queen would read it, and she'd say yes or no, or tell that Michael to fuck off, or whatever she'd say. I never saw the scribbles, but it was a really interesting process, because I remember sort of, you know, I mean, that's quite close, and I was in rooms with the Queen and nobody else much, and except the Prime Minister, and no other camera or whatever. I mean, we got amazing access, but it wasn't the sort of, we didn't have ordinary conversations, me and her.
Were you not tempted, once you're in the presence of Her Majesty, that at that point you could steer her in one direction or another, because it's
Well, it's interesting, that's clear. There's a bit before it, which was in effect, I think, it was a wonderful moment, which illustrates what you're saying. So we'd been, after much negotiation, allowed to do the first, you know, in theory 2 minutes, it became 5 of this Prime Ministerial audience, the whole point being that nobody's there, so we couldn't obviously do the whole thing, otherwise it would be false. No assistants, no secretaries, no nothing, no agenda, no paper, nothing recorded at all for future. And that's what Cameron was making the point. It's a sort of therapeutic almost. He can tell more. Prime Ministers have said they can tell more than they can their spouse, let alone their colleagues, because she's never going to reveal it, etc. So we were in for a bit, but the arrangement was, well, one, we were told just 2 people, so Michael, it'll just be the cameraman and the sound recordist, not you, and so I said, fine, I'm the sound recordist for this.
Yeah.
And we were allowed to go into the room first to recce it for light, and I remember saying and for this, it was the press secretary herself who was accompanying us, our minder. Obviously it was a big deal, Prime Minister, Queen, you could get bigger from her point of view. And I said, can we just bring the camera just to sort of be able to look at the light through the camera, which is some technical nonsense about recceing the light. And then I saw photographs of, you know, grandchildren and great-grandchildren on her mantelpiece, and I said, can we just get a few shots, you know, because I knew when it came to our 2 minutes, we wouldn't have any time to cut away. Yes, okay, so, you know, you will stand here, cameraman here, me there, sound, you know, trying to be a good sound recordist, and press secretary of the Queen in this particular, couldn't move. And we were told we had to come into the room. We couldn't come into the room before the Queen, but we had to come in before the Prime Minister. I said, that's fine. I wasn't going to say, you know, nothing, I wasn't going to argue with anything. We as the Queen, we were able to film the Prime Minister coming along the corridor with the private secretary. He arrives first. The hierarchies of these things are very, you know, clever. You go to the boss's room. The boss kind of summons.
So there's a real chain of command.
Completely, of course, and she's at the top of this. And so Prime Minister arrives, goes into a sitting room and is given a cup of coffee or a stiff sherry or whatever it is. We were told we could film that. Then we could film. We had to stand in a sort of side corridor for a corridor, and the Queen would go into her private sitting room area, which is from presumably, I don't know, the kitchen where she was having beans on toast or something. That we didn't film, but this was a private room where she has audiences with the Prime Minister and others with family photographs. We could stand there. And once the Queen had gone in, we would be allowed in, and sort of 20 seconds that later the equerry would bring the Prime Minister. And I said to the cameraman, I remember thinking, I've got to get this really across well, and I said to him, don't turn the camera. We put a new, it was 3 years in, it was a disc rather than a card. It was a 90-minute disc, and I said, don't turn it off ever. And I said, he said, fine. I said, actually, when I see the rushes, I want to see carpet. Show me carpet. He said, what do you mean? I said, when you're just walking along the corridors, I want to see that the camera never went off. Absolutely. So we were then put in a position in this little corridor, and I put the camera in front of me and me behind, just in case, and I told him to rest the camera on his shoulder. And a door opened, and it was the Queen's page, and I realised she must be about to come, and then the door opened, and she was just walking through her home, and she looked up and saw us. And of course she'd agreed that we'd be there, but she'd forgotten at that moment. It was a sort of revealing moment of her being herself rather than a public face. Then she went in, then we went in, and we did not speak to her, she didn't speak to us. It was a weird moment, but it was actually just what one wanted. She treated us as part of the furniture, which is an observational filmmaking quantity. So we stood where we meant to stand, And she just looked around, and rather like a sort of house-proud woman having an important guest, she sort of saw that under this huge marble mantelpiece there was a 2-bar electric fryer that was slightly skew-if. So she put her patent leather handbag down on the chair, and she went over, I'm going to demonstrate. She went to the mantelpiece, and she almost sort of checked the dust, but she didn't. But then she sort of kicked the fryer to get it right. And then she looked and was happy, and then she came and stood there, and then the Prime Minister, Your Majesty. And it was just, that was, I mean, thank God she didn't make small talk with us, because actually that was better. There was another one in Balmoral where she did actually talk to us while we were waiting. But in a way, you want people not to engage.
No, and maybe, and we're running a little bit out of time, so we're going to zoom through the other fantastic clips we have, but Emma, just the right side of cheeky. In terms of, you've got your access, you're there, you're with the Freemasons, you're with the Queen of England, you're in the company of the Prime Minister, whoever it is, you have to somehow follow and obey the agreement you've made, but perhaps test the boundaries of it slightly.
I don't know about the Queen, because I think that might be slightly different with her people all around her, but always ask for that little bit more.
Yeah, or even not ask sometimes. What do you think, Siobhan?
Just push it.
I just remember the really great Louis
push.
Theroux film with Anne Widdecombe,
Yeah.
which wasn't the most promising subject matter, but Anne Widdecombe went on a cruise with her mother and insisted that her mother doesn't feature in the film. But Louis could come and they could shoot her, but don't, whatever you do, speak to my mother. And Louis, being the scamp he is, pretty much spent all his energy trying to get access to the mother.
But Louis has
and
done
in the end he
amazing
did, and it
things.
was,
I mean,
but
if you
it was,
think
he
Jimmy
didn't do
Savile
exactly.
question, the
Yeah.
one thing of Jimmy Savile that always comes out is Louis sitting there in a car going along saying, and what's this about you? And he pushes it.
You have
So,
to.
so
You have to push it.
you can't be too dutiful.
And you
say
don't realise you're pushing it a lot of that. I mean, it depends how good you are at the job, which sort of Michael and Emma do. They don't realise what you're doing.
You
But
can't
also
be, you
being
can't be too
appreciated.
nice.
Well, you can ask all the questions and you carry on talking to them, but the other thing is if they go, oh, you can't do that, oh no, you can't do that, you go, let me do it and let's decide later, because we can't come back. And by that point, they trust you
That's
enough
very good.
and they let you do it, and then you can have an argument on another day.
I must
Never have the
remember that
argument on the day.
Well, let's take a look at some other great examples of access achieved by Michael. You recently filmed when Anton Deck met the Prince for ITV. Let's take a look at the clip. Now, a lot of what we're talking about in terms of difficult access would be observational documentary. This is presenter-led, and I'm imagining with their charm and wit that Anton Deck helps in your job, really, ultimately, in terms of mollifying the Prince and just oiling the wheels.
Well, of course, they're charming and fun and cover a new demographic from the Prince's point of view, so there was motivation there to agree to this rather weird television commission, which is the Princes of Light Entertainment meeting the Prince of the Realm. And it was, I have to say, when I was asked if I'd be interested, I did worry it would possibly be the worst piece of television ever. In the sense, it could have gone just horribly wrong, and of course they were essential to making it go right, and indeed in their relationship. They would acknowledge, and any presenter knows, that there's a lot of oiling of wheels that goes on before the filming starts. Yeah. And I think there's one other clip, and I just will introduce it because it's perhaps a demonstration of what's occasionally needed. After much negotiation, we got access to Harry and William, and in principle, and it was sort of what was agreed was a 10-minute interview in a sit down in a lit room at Kensington Palace, and that was it. And I remember speaking to the press, people of the young princes, and saying, basically agreeing to anything that they suggested, because it was all wonderful, and but just perhaps a little extra thought that they might be a bit more dynamic if they were walking around a bit before we did the sit-down interview, and could we possibly do that around Kensington Palace, because that, obviously, my agenda was to just be incredibly nosy as much as possible about anything to do with their lives. But I was able to give genuine reasons as to why it would be better for everybody and be more relevant. And they were doing it because they'd agreed to talk nicely about their father's charitable work, which was nominally the subject of the film, which is why we got that conversation was even possible. But I knew I wanted more. And then when it came to them finally agreeing, yes, we could do a bit of walking around, I said perhaps we could meet outside the building rather than just walking down a corridor, because I was trying to get as much as possible. And eventually it was agreed that they would meet outside. But they said, and I said, can we just get radio mics on William and Harry, or there were mics, this is what I has to call them, before it starts? No, they will be more comfortable just saying hello to Anton. They've met once 10 years ago, and getting to warm up with, and then put the radio mics, and then you could film them walking in. And I remember saying, gratuitously offensively to them, that unlike Ant and Dec, William and Harry weren't good enough actors to reprise a hello, and if you do that, it often is very false. So could we possibly just get the radio mics on first, have a genuine hello, and then we break and spend 5, even 10 minutes getting to know each other, and then we could start filming when everybody was comfortable. And actually, at first he said no, and I persuaded and got that. And so I and the sound recordist went to find William and Harry in the place they were waiting. They were charming, as you could imagine. Not unused to having a radio mic put on them. Normally it would be at a later stage. And then we got,
yes, it's brilliant. Well, definitely.
It's a small technical point.
No, but it's brilliant. Let's take a look.
I don't want to over-anecdotalize this, but I just remembered now, I've forgotten about that when I was being given the sort of recce tour of where the princes could be filmed and where we might go and all that, the assistant press officer to their Royal Highnesses, I said, oh, nice pictures, and he said, well, yeah, but don't get too much about them, because Harry doesn't like that one. So I said to Ant and Dec, as you're walking in, you might mention that picture of Harry. And in a way, I'm telling that tale, in a way, the press officer was being unsophisticated in telling me, a television person, not to do something. But actually, he was wrong, and I was right. I picked it up, I told Ant and Dec, make sure you touch on the picture of Harry, because he doesn't like it, because it's, yeah. And how does Prince Harry come across? Fabulous.
Brilliant.
As a result of a joke about his picture, etc.
Definitely, it's comes back to the slight cheekiness, Siobhan, and also that the idea that if there's an elephant in the room, I mean that's a very sort of light-hearted encounter. But if there's an aspect to the person that you're making the film about which is unattractive, or if there's a public perception, it's amazing how it cuts through if you're direct about that and just say, look, people think you're weird. Tell me more.
Yeah, I mean, our prison series. First and last 24 hours in prison. It's quite interesting. We made STV, Mick McAvoy worked really hard to get access when prisons in England weren't letting anybody in, Scottish prisons. And just going slightly off, this goes back to the point that if you've got nothing to hide, if you don't mind the cameras in, you'll let them in. And the Scottish Prison Service had a very good story to tell. They had pumped lots of money through the prison service, and so they were looking good.
Yeah.
They do look good.
They were working very, very hard on rehabilitation.
Exactly, whereas in England the public money wasn't going to the prison, so they don't want us in, whereas in Scotland they let us in. And it's a really interesting line in the prisoners telling their tales, from when they first get admitted to prison and when they're about to be released. And access to them has been impressive. And what they've told and what the prison officers have told. It's a very humane story that's come across. But actually, again, I just say in this room, we're going for a second series, and we've decided we're going to be much tougher on the prisoners, because so often, when I put my hands up, in my liberal way, I fell for their stories. In series 2, those same characters who were released are back in.
Back in, yeah.
And you think, whoa, I thought,
yeah, because they've sort of been humanised.
Yeah,
which is what happens with monsters if you make a documentary about them, because it's still a human being. But then you have to keep reminding yourself, this chap murdered someone.
Or domestic violence has permanently disfigured his partner.
Yeah.
She's sitting at home thinking, has he really got God? Has he really converted to Catholicism as one of them did? Is this really going to work? And then he's back in.
It's brilliant. Well, let's say it was an incredible series, and I'm really excited that there's another one coming. And it's such a great hook, or something that just really engages the viewer, which is the notion of the first and last 24 hours being
something more on giving this access, actually, is the trust. So it was Scottish television getting into the Scottish prison service.
Yeah.
really hard, as they admit, for an English indie to have got in there. They were the local television service, they knew them, they knew each other, so there's an immediate trust there. And
Yeah.
that
And it
goes
shows you
forward.
that shows us that you can't always go through the normal channels, like we said, the generic email. That
Yeah.
you might need to have contact. That there's someone on the inside who's a friend of a friend. You just have to do whatever it takes. Be as innovative as you can to, as you say, they're more receptive to a Scottish production company. Did you have to posh it up a bit for the Royals? Were you quite grand?
No, because they
You dress
can
up.
smell. I mean, I know. Yeah, of course, I wore a suit and tie, definitely, for all meetings at Buckingham Palace, and I worried about my shoes, which I haven't today. No, I mean, in very crude terms, I come across slightly posh, but that I know that I'm not, and they know I'm not. I'm a North London boy, went to state school, not army. All the sort of stuff that is
Establishment.
Is that not at all? But equally, I can brush up and sort of present okay. But if I tried to be anything I wasn't, they would have seen through it. And I think in other words, you don't have to be one of them. But if you're a Scottish TV production company and you're talking Scottish prison, that obviously helps to be in the right
Actually,
place.
the universal theme of just respect and charm and warmth.
And
But also
you
you can't
can't
pretend-
news reporters going in the whole time, so they know the news reporters as well. So there's a whole relationship already started before you've even got onto the documentaries.
But you can't pretend to be something you're not either.
Mm.
So, you can go in and you show respect for the way they are, but if you pretend to be something, they will check you out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that definitely wouldn't cut it in prison's first and last 24 hours. Take a look. You're gonna love this. Well, that's it takes us to a different area really, and we're going to take a walk on the dark side, because we'll look at what Ross Kemp has been up to as well. And this is a situation where prison is obviously a closed organisation, institution, and also an environment not without its risks for the filmmakers. I would have thought. I mean,
It depends where you want. I mean, in the Scottish prisons, they only let 2 crew members in at a time, and those crew members, they stay in the same prison throughout the shooting period. So then, again, it's all back to building up a relationship. And I don't think, I've visited a couple of times, you feel totally safe. There are cameras everywhere, there are security guards everywhere. In a UK prison, you're fine.
okay.
I think slightly different for Emma's teams who were in a Honduras prison. Is that right? Yeah.
Last year we've worked in Poland, Mexico, Philippines and Honduras, and you couldn't get more different all over the world. Everywhere you go, you've got a whole new set of rules to learn,
Yes.
a whole new set of behaviours, because you have to behave in a very certain way. But in Honduras, the murderer, who is the head coordinator, basically the prison has handed over running the prison on the inside to the inmates, and they are headed up by a convicted murderer who makes a fortune week in, week out of the other prisoners. And they literally lock themselves up every night, and the only person in the prison that the guards are allowed to lock up, and they only go in once a day, is the head coordinator. It's a very strange place. We went in and we thought, are we doing the right thing here? Because we lived there for a week. We've already seen a gun, we've already seen several knives, machetes are everywhere. And
Surrounded by dangerous people.
surrounded by very dangerous people. But, you just have to keep your wits about you a little bit and follow the rules. And you have to be very careful that you don't push it you're talking about pushing it.
Yeah.
That's one place you don't push it.
No, indeed. And similarly, if you think about working with Ross Kemp, who is genuinely puts himself in dangerous situations. doesn't
He is immensely brave.
Or
and
mad.
Brave. And he has a very strong team around him. That's one of his strengths as well. Ross manages to build a very competent, supportive team, and they all, before doing something, sit there, the producers and that, and shall we do this, and they make a collective decision whether to go in and do that. And but even so, and I know what he's doing, and I check the health and safety forms, but in this Mongolia film, he comes back and they said they were going down a mine, fine, And I saw the footage a couple of weeks ago. I was shocked. He goes down in a tin bath with people hauling him up, and I thought, oh my God, I'm so glad I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Before. And then in the other one, in the Syria film, he gets shot at. And so you are always worried. I mean, I think it'd be disingenuous to.
Are there times when, as the commissioner, you've had to just say, no, you're not doing that, that's too dangerous?
I think his agent does that very effectively.
Right.
Is more likely to step in at that bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's obviously lots of protocols in place. So he has security advisors. Sky has security advisors, and if it's too unsafe or proven to unsafe, no, he doesn't.
So there are times when you'll have access and don't use it. That can happen.
Yeah, though. Interestingly, in some places access is getting more and more difficult, like India. So when you're going to a foreign country, you have to declare that you're going in under the auspices of journalism, and you have to say what the story is. And we were going to do a drug story in the Punjab, and we couldn't get visas for that.
Well, that must be the ultimate gatekeeper, would be the state,
Yeah.
the government authorities. Then you're really fighting against a huge thing. So, well, let's have a little bit of a look at Ross Kemp. And this clip is Extreme World, the fight against ISIS. Let's take a look. I suppose one way to endear yourself to people you're making a film about is to muck in, to roll your sleeves up a bit. I mean, there's no better example.
Well, for commissioners to go out and get.
Well, that would really help, wouldn't it? So that's brilliant. Well, look, we've seen some amazing clips. I think you'll agree. We'd love to have your input, your questions, comments. What would you all like to ask my rather illustrious panel? Yes, sir, over there.
It's really interesting.
Oh, we'll get you a microphone, actually. Thank you. Sorry.
Two very quick questions. Are there any films that you've done in your career that have never let you go, as in the people, in maybe in a negative way, that you've never really been able to extricate yourself from getting involved in that group of people? And have you ever found yourself in a story where you actually become too involved and you have an opportunity to make the story more interesting by doing something or becoming instrumentally involved in events? And perhaps what your thought process is there.
Yeah. I mean, you said that you're still friends with
I am.
a lot of your... How about you and Prince Charles?
Yeah.
I wouldn't claim.
Text him.
I would
Did you put a tyre to go for tea?
I didn't put my ties to go for you. No, that would be ludicrous to think I had any real relationship with him. Although, unlike his mother, I did have long conversations with him, and he has some hidden charms. No, I think probably the one I can't let go is the series The House, 6 hours for BBC Two, transmitted 20 years ago, which was a year in the life of the Royal Opera House, and it was a strange thing to do because the then chief executive was Jeremy Isaacs, who had previously been chief executive of Channel 4 Television and was an extremely experienced television producer person. So it was a strange experience to film him in his totally different role, and the viewing that I'm showing the films to him in this viewing agreement, and that was a really weird experience. And he was much criticised in the press and the public for allowing us in as a result of people's delight in what the programme revealed. So he came in for a lot of stick, professionally and personally. And I have to say, I remember worrying about, and when he saw the films, he didn't quite realise the effect they'd have on a wider audience. And it is, I think none of us necessarily know how things will go on transmission. That's as the filmmakers, the film subjects, even an experienced person like him, had no idea the extent to which there would be huge controversy, front pages of newspapers and columns, etc. So I worried that he'd be very cross with me, actually, and to show the generosity and spirit of the man. I didn't see him for a few months after the series went out, and then I found myself at some event where he was also. It was a marble hall in the reception area, and I heard this voice saying, "Waldman, come here!" And he sort of wanted it was like as if he was at public school, which he wasn't, headmaster summoning me to, a caning. And he gave me a great slap on the back and said, "You rogue, you did me down," or what? I mean, he was making the point, and then we've been good friends since. So good for him. I mean, that shows a real, bigness.
I think the follow through is nice, whereby when the film is finished, it's nice to, if you're approached by the contributor, it's nice if you respond to their email. If someone's looking for a copy of it, a tape. I've done so many shoots where the previous company had made a film about them and they begged for a DVD and they never got it.
But why would you
all of that. That's right. It's strange.
No, but the aftercare.
The aftercare,
and
it can be absent.
Well, I think that if this is what I was probably badly trying to say earlier, that you have to immerse yourself. You have to be, you don't necessarily have to be best mates with people, but you have to understand the essence of what makes them. And
some kind of bond.
Yeah, definitely, and it can be really rewarding. The film that is still with me is something that I made 25 years ago with a woman and her 4-year-old child who had a very serious genetic disease, who was dying, and it took 18 months for him to die. 18 months we made a film together, and it was profoundly life-changing for me because I had a child the same age at the time. I was a bit younger, and it completely affected the way that I thought of parenthood and that bond with a son. And she was a remarkable woman, and we're still friends.
That's amazing. Well, the clock's against us. We might go quite rapid fire now, if that's okay. Yes, madam.
For Siobhan, really, it's obviously the problem with producers a lot of the time is now institutions becoming more media savvy. You get in the chicken and egg situation where they won't give you access unless you've got commission, and understandably from a commissioner's perspective you want proof of access. So for producers that maybe aren't as well esteemed as Emma and Michael, what advice would you give when bringing you or access, and what do you look for from producers?
Is that me?
Yeah.
Right. So often people will say they're not going to talk to me unless they've got a broadcaster's name behind them, which is, and if it's something I'm genuinely interested in, if it's access, I'll just say, yes, say Sky are tentatively interested. And it's absolutely fine to use the name because clearly you were not going to get it across the line unless the broadcaster's there. With Freemasons, I was on board from almost word go, and that works as well. So I think as long as you get a conversation going with us early along in the process, that's fine. If it's something I don't want, I'll tell you.
It sounds like difficult access is also, it's slightly different rules in a way. It's not the normal processes, and the channel is also pragmatic as well as the producer. Any more? I don't want to leave anyone out. Okay, we've got a lady now. Freya's, I'm going to be in big trouble. So let's just take this last question.
Oh, hi. Question for Siobhan. Siobhan, I noticed that the American networks are very funny about casting. When you're going into some place, let's say like Harrow, how does Sky approach casting? Do you sort of go on blind faith that you're going to have all your characters tick those boxes, your villain, your ingenue?
Sorry, can you explain?
Casting.
Casting, yeah.
Well, no, you work with the producer, so they will immerse themselves and come up with, say, 5 or 6 main characters, and they will get it then, they'll do some filming with them, and then they'll come and show you a casting tape, and you will go through it, and invariably you say, yes, they're all, really strong. If you think it's lacking something, you tell them. So again, you're getting involved early on in the process, but in the sense that, Emma went into Freemasons, we hadn't got one person, but I'd seen them enough in the rooms to know that it was going to be a huge cast there. Yeah.
I mean, in America, you're right. They expect to have it all up front, all neatly in a row, and life's not like that, is it?
But I understand the American environment, but it is, they really do need to know that you can cast up to a point in advance, because that's where recce's and getting to know people, but the whole point is that things develop. And so, if one has to give a casting tape of some sort, then if that's the only way to get it across the line, then so be it. But they need to, if they've got any intelligence, which one hopes.
But you trust your producer, don't you?
All right. And on that note, trusting the producer, on that bombshell, I want to thank all of you predominantly for your attendance. It's very early start for the Sheffield Documentary Festival, because documentary folk work hard and they seem to drink quite a lot too. So it's brilliant that you've made it this morning. And perhaps if any of my colleagues are around outside, if you have questions you didn't get a chance to answer, they might be amenable depending on how busy they are. this morning. But otherwise, we're delighted that you came. I'd also like to thank Marvin Benoit from Sky Commissioning Editor in Factual, who organised today's event, produced the whole thing. So many thanks to Marvin. The whole team from Sky, and thanks very much for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of the festival. And many thanks to Siobhan Mulholland and Michael